Hey, bud. I'm going to read you chapter 25 and maybe 26 of The Queen of Sorcery, if I have time. So you can have some of your book to listen to after while I'm on my vacation trip. So here we go, chapter 25. For the next several days, they all remained on Greg's ship, waiting for word from Silk and Mr. Wolf. Sinedra recovered from her indisposition and appeared back on deck. The whole business seemed to Garion to be taking forever, though in fact his mind was very quick, and he was learning surprisingly fast. Sinedra was too thoughtless to compliment him, though. She seemed to await his next mistake almost breathlessly, delighting as it seemed with each opportunity to ridicule him. Her proximity and her light, spicy perfume distracted him as they sat close together, and he perspired as much from the occasional touch of his hand or arm as he did from the climate. Because they were both young, she was intolerant and he was stubborn. The sticky, humid heat made both of them short-tempered and irritable, so the lessons erupted into bickering and more often than not. When they woke up one morning, a black square-rigged Nissian ship rocked in the river current at a nearby wharf. A foul, evil kind of reek carried to them from her on the fitful morning breeze. "What's that smell?" Garion asked one of the sailors. "Slaver," the sailor answered grimly, pointing at the Nissian ship. "You can smell them from 20 miles away when you're at sea." Garion looked at the ugly black ship and shuddered. Beric and Mandrellin drifted across the deck and joined Garion at the rail. "Looks like a scow," Beric said to about the Nissian ship, his voice heavy with contempt. He was stripped to the waist and his hairy torso ran with sweat. "It's a slave ship," Garion told him. "It smells like an open sewer," Beric complained. "A good fire would improve it tremendously." "A sorry trade, my lord Beric," Mandrellin said. "Nissian hath dealt in human misery for untold centuries." "Is that a Drasnian wharf?" Beric asked with narrowed eyes. "No," Garion answered. "The sailors say everything on that side is Nissia." "That's a shame," Beric growled. A group of male-shirted men in black cloaks walked out onto the wharf where the slave ship was moored and stopped near the vessel's stern. "Uh-oh," Beric said. "Where's Hedar?" "He's still below," Garion replied. "What's the matter?" "Keep an eye out for him. Those are Murgos." The shaven-headed Nissian sailors pulled open a hatch on their ship and barked a few rough orders down into the hold. Slowly, a line of dispirited-looking men came up. Each man wore an iron collar and a long chain fastened them together. Mandrellin stiffened. "What's wrong?" Beric asked. "A Rendishman!" the knight exclaimed. "I had heard of this, but I did not believe it." "Heard of what?" "An ugly rumor hath persisted in Erendia for some years," Mandrellin answered, his face white with rage. "We are told that some of our nobles have, on occasion, enriched themselves by selling their serfs to the Nissians." "Looks like it's more than a rumor," Beric said. "There," Mandrellin growled. "See that crest upon the tunic of that one there? It's the crest of Votarol. I know the Baron of Votarol for a notorious spendthrift, but I not thought him to be dishonorable. Upon my return to Erendia, I will denounce him publicly." "What good's that going to do?" Beric asked. "He'll be forced to challenge me," Mandrellin said grimly. "I will prove his villainy upon his body." Beric shrugged. "Serf or slave, what's the difference?" "Those men have rights, my lord," Mandrellin stated. "Their lord is required to protect them and care for them. The oath of knighthood demands it of us. This vile transaction hath stained the honor of every true Orangish knight. I shall not rest until I have bereft that foul baron of his miserable life." "Interesting idea," Beric said. "Maybe I'll go with you." Hedar came up on deck, and Beric moved immediately to his side and began talking quietly to him, holding one of his arms firmly. "Make them jump around a bit," one of the Murgos declared harshly. "I want to see how many can walk." A heavy-shouldered Nissian uncoiled a long whip and began to flick it deftly at the chained men. The slaves began to dance feverishly on the wharf beside the slave ship. "Dog's blood!" Mandrellin swore as his knuckles turned white, gripping the railing. "Easy," Garion warned. "Aunt Pole says we're supposed to stay pretty much out of sight." "It cannot be borne!" Mandrellin cried. The chain that bound the slaves together was old and pitted with rust. When one slave tripped and fell, a link snapped, and the man found himself suddenly free. With an agility born of desperation, he rolled quickly to his feet, took 2 steps, and plunged off of the wharf into the murky waters of the river. "This way, man!" Mandrellin called to the swimming slave. The burly Nissian with the whip laughed harshly and pointed at the escaping slave. "Watch," he told the Murgos. "Stop him, you idiot!" one of the Murgos snapped. "I paid good gold for him." "It's too late," the Nissian said with an ugly grin. "Watch!" The swimming man suddenly shrieked and sank out of sight. When he came up again, his face and arm were covered with slimy foot-long leeches that infested the river. Garion's mind exploded. He gathered himself with awful concentration, pointed one hand at the wharf just beyond his own ship, and said, "Be there!" He felt an enormous surge as though some vast tide were rushing out of him, and he reeled almost senseless against Mander Allen. The sound of his head was deafening. The slave, still writhing and covered with oozing leeches, was suddenly lying on the wharf. A wave of exhaustion swept over Garion. If Mander Allen had not caught him, he would have fallen. "Where did he go?" Beric demanded, still staring at the turbulent spot in the river where the slave had been an instant before. "Did he go under?" Wordlessly, and with his shaking hand, Mander Allen pointed at the slave, who still lay weakly struggling on the Drazian wharf about 20 yards in front of the bow of their ship. Beric looked at the slave and then back to the river. The big man blinked with surprise. A small boat with 4 Nissians at the oars put out from the other wharf and moved deliberately toward Greg's ship. A tall Morgro stood in the bow, his face scarred and angry. "You have my property," he shuddered across the intervening water. "Return the slave to me at once." "Why don't you come and claim him, Morgro?" Beric called back. He released Hedder's arm. The Algar moved to the side of the ship, stopping only to pick up a long boat hook. "Will I be bothered?" the Morgro asked a bit doubtfully. "Why don't you come alongside and we'll discuss it?" Beric suggested pleasantly. "You're denying me rights to my own property," the Morgro complained. "Not at all," Beric told him. "Of course there might be a few points of law involved there. This wharf is Draznian territory, and slavery isn't legal in Draznia. Since that there is the case, this man's not a slave anymore." "I'll get my men," the Morgro said. "We'll take the slave by force if we have to." "I think we'd take that as a look as an invasion on Alorn territory," Beric warned with a great show of regret. "In the absence of our Draznian cousins, we'd almost be compelled to take steps to defend the wharf for them. What do you think, Mander Allen?" "Thy perceptions are most acute, my lord," Mander Allen replied. "By common usage, honorable men are morally obliged to defend the territory of kinsmen in their absence." "There," Beric said to the Morgro. "You see how it is. My friend here is an Aaron, so he's totally neutral in this matter. I think we'd have to accept his interpretation of the affair." Greg's soldiers had begun to climb the rigging by now, and they clung to the ropes like great evil-looking apes, fingering their weapons and grinning at the Morgro. "There is yet another way," the Morgro said ominously. Garion could feel a force beginning to build, and a faint sound like an echo inside his head. He drew himself up, putting his hands on the wooden rail in front of him. He felt a terrible weakness, but he steeled himself and tried to gather his strength. "That's enough of that," Pole said crisply, coming up on the deck with Durnik and Sinandra behind her. "We were merely having a little legal discussion," Beric said innocently. "I know what you were doing," she snapped. Her eyes were angry. She looked coldly across the intervening stretch of the river of the Morgro. "You'd better leave," she told him. "I have something to retrieve first," the man in the boat called back. "I'd forget about it." "We'll see," he said. He straightened and began muttering as if to himself, and his hands moving rapidly in a series of intricate gestures. Garion felt something pushing at him, almost like a wind, though the air was completely still. "Be sure you get it right," Aunt Pole advised quickly. "If you forget even the tiniest part of it, it will explode in your face." The man in the boat froze, and faintly worried frown crossed his face. The secret wind that had been pushing at Garion stopped. The man began again, his fingers weaving in the air and his face fixed with concentration. "You do it like this, Gromlin," Aunt Pole said. She moved her hand slightly, and the Garion felt a sudden rush as if the wind were pushing at him, and he turned against the blow the other way. The Gromlin threw his hands up and reeled back, stumbling and falling to the heavy bottom of his boat, as if he had been given a very big push. The boat surged backwards several yards. The Gromlin half raised his eyes wide, and his face was deathly pale. "Return to your master, dog," Aunt Pole said scathingly. "Tell him to beat you for not learning your lessons properly." The Gromlin spoke quickly to the Nissians at the oars, and they immediately turned the boat and rowed back towards the slave ship. "We had a very nice little fight brewing there, Polgara," Beric complained. "Why'd you have to spoil it?" "Grow up," she ordered bluntly. Then she turned on Garion, her eyes blazing and her white lock at her brow like a streak of fire. "You idiot! You refuse any kind of instruction, then you burst out like a raging bull. Have you even the slightest conception of what the upward translocation causes? You've alerted every Gromlin in Sistor to the fact that we're here." "He was dying," Garion protested, gesturing helpfully at the slave lying on the wharf. "I had to do something." He was beyond your help." Her voice was cold, even brutal. "You're 4,000 years old. Our whole lives go by a blink of your eyes. We're just entertainment for you, an hour's diversion. You manipulate us like puppets for your own amusement. Well, I'm tired of being manipulated. You and I are finished." This is Garion yelling back at Aunt Pole because she was mad at him for using magic. It probably went further than he intended, but in his anger he'd finally run away with him, and the words seemed to rush out of him before he could stop himself. She looked at him, her face pale as if suddenly he had struck her. Then she drew herself up. Are you finished? Finished, you and I? How can you even begin to understand what I had to do to bring you to this world? You have been my only care for over 1,000 years. I have endured anguish and loss and pain beyond your ability to understand, and the words mean all for you. I've lived in poverty and squalor for hundreds of years at a time, all for you. I give up a sister I love more than life itself, all for you. I've gone through fire and despair worse than fire a dozen times over, all for you. And you think this has all been entertainment for me, some idea of amusement? You think the kind of care I've devoted to you for 1,000 years and more comes cheaply? You and I will never be finished, Belgarian, never. We will go on together until the end of the days as necessary. We will never be finished. You owe me that much. There was a dreadful silence. The others, shocked by the intensity of Aunt Pole's words, stood staring first at her and then at Garion. Without speaking further, she turned and went below deck again. Garion looked around helplessly, suddenly terribly ashamed and terribly alone. I had to do it, didn't I? He asked no one in particular, not entirely sure what he meant. They all looked at him, but no one answered his question. All right, that was chapter 25.